Harry had planned for it all. Things only he saw over the horizon.
Any fan of science fiction will have heard the name Isaac Asimov at some point in their lives. In fact, his work is so foundational to the genre that many of his fictional concepts often get mistaken for real ones. But speaking of the word foundational, that's why we're making this video today, because we want to discuss the organizations that form the basis for his most important creation till date. Foundation is a series that attempts to navigate through the future of humanity in a way that is both realistic and unrealistic. Unrealistic because it's unlikely to happen in the time span that Asimov envisioned. Realistic because, well, the whole premise of the series is based on human history and intuition. If you haven't seen Apple TV's Foundation, then this is your spoiler warning. Because in this video, we will discuss the two foundations established by the overarching protagonist of the series, Harry Sheldon, while discussing their reasons for existing and explaining their purpose.
Fall back! Go!
Why they were created, the stated and real purpose of the Foundation. Foundation began as a series based on a lie. What do we mean by that? Well, it's exactly as it sounds. The establishment of the Foundation itself was based on a lie, and that lie was told by the true protagonist of the series. Throughout the novels and the seasons of Foundation, we meet several characters who, technically, fulfill the role of a protagonist, but the true one is only ever seen briefly, and when he is, he makes an impact that reverberates through space and time. That man is none other than Harry Sheldon, the person who perfected the grasping science of psychohistory. Psychohistory wasn't thought up by Sheldon himself. It had its roots in the thought process of a spacer scientist who lived 8,000 years before him. But Sheldon is the one who perfected those thoughts and turned them into a proper science. Psychohistory is a discipline that does not work on the individual level. Instead, it looks at large groups of humans, organizations that have economic and social power, and then attempts to predict what they would do in response to any given situation. It operates off the premise that humans are the only sentient species in the known universe, and creates predictions based off of human history and the core concepts of human psychology. After Harry Sheldon perfected the mathematics involved with making such predictions, he applied them to the existing galactic empire and came to a haunting conclusion. Anyone with 2 eyes and a working brain could have seen that the empire was already in decline, despite projecting stability. Its capital, Trantor, had a surface area that was 40% less than Earth's, and yet its population was 40 billion people. We can't even imagine such numbers existing on our current planet, let alone one that we conquered, and therein lies the problem of the galactic empire and humanity in general. When faced with a problem that is impossible to solve without taking extreme measures that might go against one's ideals, humans have a tendency to gloss over the problem or ignore it entirely. The galactic empire took the latter route, but once Sheldon's new science became viable, it was forced to see the truth. Harry Sheldon went around the cosmos gathering up the best scientists and mathematicians to create his psychohistory research project, with the aim of perfecting and refining this new science he had come up with. Initially, it seemed like nothing more than a pipe dream to the authorities in charge, so they allowed it to exist, and even allocated resources to it after a bit of good old manipulation and negotiation. It was only when the results of the project were published that people started panicking, because Sheldon realized that the end was coming far sooner than anyone could have imagined, and it would take humanity far longer to fix the problem than anyone would have believed. Sheldon's math showed him that if things continued to unfold the way they were unfolding, then mankind would soon backslide into an era of barbarism that resembled the Middle Ages, or went back even further in their history. And given the galactic scope of things, this interregnum would last far longer than our own written history has. Sheldon predicted that 30,000 years of chaos and turmoil lay ahead of humans, should they continue on their current path of opulence and self-indulgence, and there was no measure sufficient enough to revert this course. The only hope they had was to gather all human knowledge into a single source, the idea being that future generations would find it and be wiser than them. He was put on trial by the Commission for Public Safety, the main governing body of the empire, for making his findings public, primarily because they believed that he was doing something behind the scenes to make the empire fail. When it became clear that he wasn't, and that his proposals were as real as the empire itself, they backed off of executing him. The only reason they did this was to put their faith in his other projection, that by gathering all human knowledge into a single encyclopedia, the period of chaos could be reduced from 30 millennia to a single millennium. But they also recognized the risk of letting such a person running loose around the capital of the empire, or indeed anywhere near places of influence. So they banished him and his team to the fringe world called Terminus, so he could establish this Encyclopedia Galactica and aid the process of preserving human progress. Sadly for them, they played right into his hands because Sheldon knew a lot more than he was letting on. And if you think about it hard enough, no encyclopedia has ever enlightened a person so much that they completely change their ways. It is true that the plan he came up with to ensure that the Galactic Empire's mistakes were never repeated would require 1,000 years to enforce. It's also true that his predictions and his discipline, psychohistory, probably saved mankind from a much worse fate where all of us would have turned into warlords, ignorant of our true potential for millennia on end. But it's not true that the Encyclopedia Galactica would be the thing to save mankind. That's because it's only a cover for Sheldon's true plan, which was to create the organizations that would. Under the guise of collecting and collating all available historical, scientific, economic, and other kinds of data, Sheldon had already worked out a way to ensure humans would be guided into their new era of existence by a firm and decisive hand. And that's the true purpose of the Foundation, which he created 31 years after his crew of encyclopedists was exiled to Terminus. Sheldon knew that if he tried to explain his plan to the masses, he'd be drawn and quartered because, on average, people don't like being told what to do, and those that do often don't have the foresight to comprehend the reasons behind it. He knew that the only way to ensure humans did not lose the knowledge they'd worked so hard to gain over the centuries was to do it clandestinely, and in such a way that his hand became the guiding force of the universe. This is the true reason behind the creation of the Foundation. So now that we have that out of the way, let's dive into the organization itself. The first foundation, the Encyclopedic Foundation number 1, as it was known in its nascent stage, was established on the peripheral planet Terminus, far away from the central planet Trantor, where Harry Sheldon was effectively imprisoned after his trial. The first foundation's stated purpose was to create a know-it-all encyclopedia, which would guide humanity through the 1,000-year Dark Age, for without it, said age would exist for 30,000 years. This Dark Age was supposed to arrive 500 years after the first foundation's establishment, but that was too long to not take action. For you see, the first foundation's true purpose was to become the base for a second galactic empire, one that would have all the positives and none of the negatives of the first one. The encyclopedists were mostly aware of the fact that their stated purpose was nothing more than a farce, but when it became clear that the empire's dissolution would necessitate record-keeping on an unimaginable scale, the Encyclopedia Galactica became a true part of its existential purpose. Harry Sheldon's plan for the first foundation was to function as the acting arm of his plan. This foundation was given all the physical knowledge of human science, aka equipment and technology, and its most precious resource was atomic weaponry. Because Terminus was located on the periphery, it was surrounded by planets that, while capable of space travel, did not possess technology advanced enough to knock it off the map. These planets, called the Four Kingdoms, also did not have atomics, but the arrival of the Foundation changed all that. As soon as they realized that these encyclopedists had set up base at Terminus, they started a campaign to annex it, which was actually the first of 8 crises that Harry Sheldon had predicted through psychohistory. The most powerful of these planets, Anacreon, had even set up a military outpost on Terminus, and it was generally understood that if they were allowed to annex it, the Foundation's plans would collapse before they even took root. To solve the first crisis, the Foundation's leader, Mayor Salvador Hardin, approached the other 3 planets in the system and offered them an alliance. In exchange for advanced technology, they would have to pledge their support to Terminus, which would keep Anacreon in check. 4 other crises followed this first one, and each of them saw the Foundation grow and evolve in ways that Sheldon had predicted. The second crisis was one about not allowing the Four Kingdoms to advance to a point where they wouldn't have to rely on the first Foundation's technical expertise. So the solution to that was to turn science into a religion. The Foundation provided the kingdoms with technology far beyond their imagination, but withheld the actual science behind it, and established priesthoods that essentially acted as their emissaries within the kingdoms. This system prevailed for a few decades and managed to placate the Four Kingdoms and Terminus's star system, but the Foundation's actions wouldn't stay hidden for long. Once other peripheral star systems and civilizations caught wind of their actions, they started moving towards destroying the Foundation. To prevent that, the Foundation adapted and became an economic body, which sold off atomics to enforce nuclear deterrence on a galactic scale. By this point, Terminus had become the center of the new civilization cropping up on the periphery, and so when it absorbed the Four Kingdoms within its administrative system, no one was surprised. However, when it came under the threat of turning into an autocracy, that's when the fourth crisis occurred. The Galactic Empire, now aware of the true purpose of this supposed body of encyclopedists, retaliated against its budding trade empire. The famous General Rios even managed to make it to Terminus's star system, but he was recalled shortly before he could claim total victory and murdered by the Emperor for daring to outshine him. This fourth crisis nearly undid all the good work that the first First Foundation had done in previous centuries, but its outcome also reaffirmed the need for its existence. Rios's demise wasn't based on any kind of logic. The logical choice for the Empire would have been to let him root out the traitors who tricked them into giving them all the resources they needed to displace it. Instead, because Rios's popularity threatened the Emperor's position and ego, he felt compelled to execute him, which was the biggest problem within the Galactic Empire. The fifth crisis was one that most Foundationers did not see coming because it involved an element that Sheldon did not account for: mutants. We can make a separate video on how the mule did what Rios couldn't and how he came this close to obliterating the Sheldon plan, so let us know if you'd like to see that. But in the end, he couldn't because of the existence of checks and balances even within the Foundation. We'll explain what we mean by that in just a moment, but before that, let's briefly touch upon the final crisis Sheldon told his encyclopedists to anticipate, and that was the moving of the capital of their budding empire. Doing so would have followed in the footsteps of every other empire created by humans throughout history, and it would have brought in an irreversible kind of social and scientific inertia. The mayor at the time of this crisis pointed this fact out to the people and managed to retain Terminus as the Foundation's capital, which prevented the emerging Foundation Federation from being ensnared by the same sins that troubled the Galactic Empire before it. We've made this Foundation's actions across 500 years sound rather successful, haven't we? After all, they were able to overcome every crisis Sheldon had predicted. But here's the thing: no system of power can enforce true change without going through troubles of its own, and the First Foundation is no different. In between each crisis, the power structure of the organization changed dramatically. It went from being a democratically elected mayoral system to a plutocracy to an outright aristocracy when the fifth crisis occurred. But the only reason it was able to stay on track was thanks to the efforts of the Second Foundation, which acted as a balancing power and kept the first one in check. The Second Foundation. The Second Foundation was an organization that was founded by Harry Sheldon before the first one, which feels kind of oxymoronic, doesn't it? But the truth is, without this foundation, the first one wouldn't have existed, let alone achieved all the things it achieved. That's because before putting a galaxy-changing organization in place, one has to ensure a system exists whereby it doesn't get corrupted and stays true to the mission. In Asimov's series, that system was the Second Foundation. When Sheldon realized that his granddaughter Wanda had the ability to think on an inhuman scale, which was revealed when she corrected an error stored in a supposedly error-free device, he knew that he needed more people like her to keep his plan from straying. So he gathered up a bunch of mentalics, people, and robots who possessed telepathic abilities and higher-order thinking, and charged them with a single mission: to use psychohistory to keep the First Foundation in line with the Sheldon plan. Sheldon didn't reveal the Second Foundation's existence to anyone. Not even the First Foundation was aware of it in the beginning, and when they realized that it truly existed, they made moves to try to destroy it because such is the nature of power. No imperial authority appreciates checks and balances, but such things are needed lest men transform into abusers from governors. The Second Foundation intervened on several matters with regards to ensuring the Sheldon plan was fulfilled, with one of its major achievements being stopping the mule's takeover of the galaxy. Being mentalics, all of them had the power to not only manipulate another sentient being's mind, they could wipe out their memories and rewire their whole personality if needed. That's exactly what they do to Mule and several members of the First Foundation when they start straying from the plan. In fact, only one member of the First Foundation was a mentalic, and he was planted there as a spy precisely to prevent it from getting corrupted. And the reason that the Second Foundation's existence and home base remained hidden from the universe for so long was quite simple. Sheldon used misdirection of the highest order. When he described the location of the Second Foundation, he said that it was located at the galaxy's edge. This made any think that the Second Foundation was on Terminus like the first one, because they interpreted it as being the periphery of the First Galactic Empire. But when Sheldon was talking about the galaxy's edge, he wasn't discussing the First Empire, he was talking about the second one, started by the Foundation Federation, and from their perspective, the old Empire's heart would serve as the new Galactic Empire's edge. So it was that Harry Sheldon hid the Second Foundation within plain sight on a planet that was populated by 40 billion people. That's right, folks. Foundation number 2 was on Trantor all along, the planet whose descent into decay started this whole story, the planet where Harry himself died. It's safe to say that without the Second Foundation, the first one would have turned into a failed experiment, much like the Galactic Empire ruled by Emperor Cleon of old. But their efforts prevented such a cruel fate from being flung at humanity, and Asimov's Foundation series ends on a more positive note than contemporary science fiction tales. With both foundations alive and well, humanity enters the Foundation era and establishes the Second Galactic Empire with a level of peace, prosperity, and cooperation that would make Dune's Imperium just jealous. But this doesn't happen without hitting a few major bumps in the road, some of which were the size of an entire planet. We wish we were kidding when we said that, but that's exactly what the superorganism Gaia is. A living planet, much like Ego from Guardians of the Galaxy. But this second Earth Mother isn't as evil as the first one was made out to be by Rick Riordan and Cory Barlog. In fact, in many ways, her existence was what the Second Foundation was supposed to model the future of humanity after, should they fail in establishing and stabilizing the Second Galactic Empire. And while that sounds cool, we're glad it didn't happen, because we can't imagine actually talking to a friggin' mug or a rock just because it has precious data that needs to be mined. Gaia 2 was supposed to be just a prototype for the actual replacement plan for the Second Empire, which was Galaxia, an organism that can only be described as a living, sentient galaxy. Both Gaia and Galaxia were conceived as the fate of humanity should it fail to put aside individuality with regards to a continuous, peaceful existence. Humans are intelligent organisms, and they can do great things if they put their minds to it and their individual differences aside. But it is also individuality that makes us human in the first place, and individuality often leads to selfishness, which is the ultimate root cause for instability and evil in this world. This is a fact that was realized eons ago by the actual conceiver of psychohistory and the Sheldon plan, though her involvement wouldn't be discovered until thousands of years later. We know that we called Harry Sheldon the true mastermind of the series, but that was a lie of sorts. Yes, he is the man who developed psychohistory from a set of axioms and theorems to an actual working science, but the individual that planted that idea in his brain was none other than the robot R. Daniil Olivos, who show casuals might know only as Ito Demerzel. This particular robot first thought of what would become the Sheldon plan when it was serving as the first minister for Emperor Cleon. In fact, it might have thought of it long before that, because Daniil's computational abilities are far beyond anything any other robot has displayed in all of Asimov's creations. It knew that if humans did not steer themselves away from their current path of putting each individual self before the larger collective, then humanity had no chance at surviving long-term. Robots were created in this universe to serve and protect humans, but their many conflicting actions and ideals often left the robots themselves confused. So Daniil decided that to fix the problem of individuality, it would create a sentient planet with a group consciousness, because when humanity is connected with one another on such an intimate level, it would become impossible for them to continue living in the old way, which inadvertently gave rise to things like avarice and slaughter. The Sheldon plan was, according to Daniil, a last chance to see if humans could truly prevail despite themselves and create a society without discrimination and wanton murder. And in the final Foundation novel, chronologically speaking, Daniil was affirmed as being right in its decision to create Gaia. Even though it had lived for 20,000 years and given humans several chances to quote-unquote correct themselves, they'd failed at almost every turn of the way. Daniil went so far as to implant the idea of goodness and correct decision-making into their genes, and still, the results remained dubious. So in the final Asimov novel, it's revealed that after much contemplation, one of his genetically engineered superior humans had decided to go through with the creation of Galaxia, the ultimate personification of unity. Now, we don't know if this plan was actually executed because Galaxia's existence is still theoretical. Just because it was decided that it should be created doesn't mean that it truly was. And to be honest with you guys, even if it was, Galaxia itself has nothing to do with Sheldon's foundations, because it was conceived by Daniil as the ultimate fail-safe move. So while we are aware that the foundations wouldn't exist without Daniil, we would also like to point out that Daniil's actions were independent of them, and that's what makes them truly belong to Harry Sheldon, at least in our opinion. If the first foundation was the Sheldon plan's arm, the second foundation was its mind, and this has many implications for the mind over might debate that still plagues our world. However, Asimov's version of it is hopeful, at least, because in the end, it is the cooperation of both that brings his universe out of a Cleon-controlled nightmare. In that regard, the two foundations are successful in achieving the purpose laid down for them by their creator, and Harry Sheldon becomes a god amongst men for predicting and then plotting a course for preventing events that would otherwise feel like Armageddon had arrived. Marvelous verdict. And that's it for our explanation of the two foundations. Which one was more useful? Which one was less dangerous? Let us know your thoughts on both of them in the comments section down below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more awesome science fiction content. We will see you guys real soon with another foundation video. So till then, stay safe. And don't believe anyone who tells you they want to know your deepest, darkest secret for an encyclopedia they're writing, because you never know. They might be plotting world conquest instead.